Today's episode is brought to you by SimpliFaster. SimpliFaster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the Speed Mat. I've gotten many of these items from SimpliFaster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that SimpliFaster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at SimpliFaster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from SimpliFaster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by SimpliFaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology.
Welcome, Just Fly Performance Podcast listeners, to another episode of the show, this time being a Q&A with yours truly. I'm turning the tables on myself, throwing out the question lines on Facebook, Instagram, and this time LinkedIn, which actually was pretty cool to do, and just to see what you guys are wondering, what you guys wonder, what my thoughts are on particular aspects of sport performance. It's interesting, the longer I've done the show, I get asked a lot. It's like, you've talked to all these experts. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I think my experience is really no different than everyone out there in many ways. We all take things and we make it our own. There's no one ultimate training program that the workout gods sent down and will work for every athlete optimally. It's all about how the coach puts it all together. So that being said, I'm just happy to share my thoughts on a few topics of performance, some of which I have picked up from the many awesome guests that have graced each episode prior. And then some just myself over time, being in the trenches and coaching, or just going through workouts myself and trying to figure stuff out. So hope you guys are all doing well, by the way. I really appreciate you guys listening to this show, this podcast. We've come a long way. I've come a long way. I actually was listening to some of the first Q&As that I did. Like it was episode 30 or 40 or something. And the first one I definitely did because I just ran out of guests at the time. And a few of these I certainly have. I'm good right now, but I just wanted to pause and take a break and just kind of get the feedback, get a feel for what you guys want to know. I always think it's interesting just to check in and find out. So that being said, let's get on to the questions. We got a lot of them. Hopefully I can get through all of them. If you put a question out there and I can't get to it or I missed it, I apologize. I would have loved to I would love to get everyone, but if I missed it, feel free to send me a message on one of the social media channels that you threw a question out, and hopefully I can get an answer for you. Anyways, let's get on to the questions. There's some great ones. Thank you for everyone who sent something in. So here we go. First one, this one came off of Facebook. Joe's Juice. Joe says, what is the one biggest game changer you have incorporated performance-wise? Actually, it's a double question. So we'll take that one on first. The biggest game changer for me, and really I'll talk about the last. I just did an episode which was like my viewpoints and transformation. So I probably talked about this. Honestly, I probably talk about a few of these topics throughout the whole list of questions as we go today. I'm probably going to repeat some stuff that I did on the other 5. I try my hardest not to. So I'll keep this short. If you listen to the last episode, I most likely talked extensively about neurotyping and how that has changed the game for me. And so not only, I've always known some athletes have a strong nervous system, some athletes have a weak nervous system, and the athletes who have a strong nervous system can handle more high intensity plyos and heavier weightlifting, and they can sprint harder more often, and their nervous system it likes that stuff. It can do that stuff better and more often, whereas athletes with a weaker nervous system, well, they have to do longer sprints, relatively speaking, maybe lower intensity plyos. Maybe they will do better with slightly higher reps in the weightlifting realm, not going to high intensity so often. So those things I've known for a while. But the neurotyping course just put everything in its place in the sense of even athletes with a strong nervous system, like type 1B and elastic, or type 1A and intensity driven, those two athletes train quite differently. And when Charlie Francis even talked about some athletes doing better with plyometrics, some athletes like the gym more, those types of things, those were the 1As and 1Bs that he was referring to. So for me, knowing how to look at an athlete's personality, just look at generally the way they move, the way they process movements in the weight room, and helping me to understand that better has just been a game changer. And I feel like I've coached athletes who have had good levels of success, but for me to truly consider myself a great coach, it's not just the athlete that you put at the top. It's the athletes, it's every athlete. It's those athletes that maybe were at the bottom, and how far can you bring them up? And can you reach every athlete as much as you can? I mean, I don't think there's ever going to be a coaching season where every single athlete on the team exceeded their expectations completely. It's never going to be like that. But neurotyping has helped me not only to train the best athletes a little bit better, but also to reach a wider spectrum. So that's been a big one. Something I'll just say this quickly too, because I've mentioned neurotyping last episode, and I don't want to be redundant, but PVC pipe work for the feet is unreal. It is awesome. I've done a few Instagram videos of it. I've recently spent some time with Gary Marinovich down at Marinovich training in Santa Cruz, which I'm sure I'll get to here later this episode. And they do a lot of PVC pipe work there. In talking with David Weck, he has also mentioned how much of it he has done. And it got to a point where I'm like, okay, I need to start doing this. I'll give it a shot. I have this large roller made out of PVC that I never used because I basically gave up foam rolling years ago. And so this thing is collecting dust. Well, I'll cut it in half and I'll just play around on it. And honestly, that's the best decision training wise that I've made in years, if not ever, because it's completely changed lower body injury prevention. My Achilles tendons are way better now, and I'm jumping higher. I touched 11.1 off two leg jump. I'm 35 now. My best ever was 11.3 when I was 24, and my squat, I can tell you for a fact that my squat is way, way, way less than it was when I was 24. So a lot of the impetus in that jump is coming from just improved foot ability and my ability to process the tendons and fascia and do it right and all that type of things. Not that I was doing it wrong when I hit 11.3 when I was 24, but it's just been good. It's been really good to me. We don't look at the feet enough, and it's an area that still demands exploration. And so PVC pipe work recently has been a huge game changer. Okay, 2-part question. Second part, Joe says, what is the biggest mistake that smart coaches make? So this is an interesting, right? I don't want it to be like a call out or anything, because I've made tons of mistakes in my coaching career. So I'm certainly, and I'm only 35, so I'm in a limited position to say things in many regards. But I will say this, just from my perspective, from where I've been, come from the results I've seen, putting everything in context, I'll say this is probably just not trying things out themselves. This is maybe a multi-part answer, but not trying a training method out oneself. I mean, I realize that once we get to a certain age, we can't do particular training methods anymore, at least not at maybe full capacity. But I think that our own intuition is very driven from our feelings and what we feel in our own body from a movement perspective. If you can train and do training exercises and put them in actual practice in your own program, that's awesome. I mean, otherwise, it's certainly great to be able to use it with athletes, no doubt. I mean, that's a huge, huge, huge learning opportunity as well. But to make things, everything really comes from our intuition, the intuition muscle, so to speak. And so being able to try something out yourself, and that's the thing too, is like we make judgments on movements so often, like, oh, I don't like that, or I like that. Just try it. Just do it. Do it and see how it feels. Do it and see how jumping and running and cutting feels afterwards if you can. And going to Z Health seminars, they really do the biofeedback thing where it's like you do an exercise and then do a mobility test to see if your nervous system liked it or not. And I don't think you necessarily even have to go into that. I think that stuff is cool, but just go through things and see if it made a change. I mean, that's like with me and PVC pipes. I'm like, holy cow, this stuff works great. You better believe that my athletes are going to be doing this work. And I wouldn't have known that unless I just tried it. And so having the open mind to try stuff is probably the biggest thing. I think it's very easy just to hear a big name coach say something, say an exercise is great, or post a video or whatever, and just start doing it without even trying it yourself or really thinking about what's going on. So that would be a big one. And then another one too is, I think, is just discounting. And this is the more I've learned from Adarian Barr, the more I watch video, and I'm slowly accumulating my 10,000 hours of video watching to become that expert in human movement, not just sprinting and jumping, but all sports, throwing and swinging and agility and cuts and movement, and it all ties together. But I've found that really learning from the world's best athletes is the way to go. A lot of times, like, people look at Usain Bolt and say, well, he's a freak. He can drag his toe because he's a freak, and it doesn't matter, he's so fast anyways, or all these things. And I think that we shouldn't discount the freaks. The freaks are who we learn from, as well as the animals too. I think there's a lot. I mean, as far as the speed relative average, if you've seen like there's like a YouTube video where it has like a human racing a horse and a cheetah and all these different animals, and they kind of are like going at the same time, and they're racing 100 meters or 400, and it's got like the cheetah finishing and then the human. I mean, we are so slow. I mean, it's just crazy. And granted, we're upright and we're on two legs, and the strategy that we produce force is much different than an animal who has, just by their positioning and the way they're low to the ground, they have four legs, their limb length distribution, they output way more horizontal force than we do. There's a big difference there, but you can still learn so much by watching them. And that's something that I was just recently reading an article on Marv Marinovich. It was an older one, and I had read it before, honestly, but it's like, after going through his system a little bit, you see it with new eyes, and like, he's had grown up watching animals. And I've talked to high level elite swim coach, motor learning experts who have this intuitive but incredibly effective way of teaching, and they grew up watching animals. And I've talked to Terry Barr, and he watches animals. And so this observation of the elite is an important thing. So I just think that that's something that we can all learn more from, is spending more time watching the world's best. Okay. So next question is from Instagram. Nathan Kiley says, "Hey Joel, in your opinion, what are the most overrated training interventions you see being popularized today?" Okay, that's an awesome question. I mean, there's probably a lot. I will say this. I'm a slight bit of a hermit in terms of social media. I spend, in terms of my learning process, okay, so I used to spend a ton of time on forums back in the day. This was, for those of you out there who are, let's say, under the age of 30 or maybe 25, I'm not sure, but there used to be this thing called forums before social media existed, where people would hop on this forum thread and type out these very longer form answers and go back and forth about these performance topics. And so I was really into that stuff for a while. Once the transition made from social media and were conversations on social media, I don't really get on that too often. And so maybe I'm not super aware of some of the trends, but some trends I do see when I am on social media is this, and so I'll cover it. And I think this is very overrated, is triple extension in sprinting and acceleration is a big triple extension and a big long first step or first two steps. And I see this, I've seen this multiple places where people, it's funny actually, you see the slow motion on YouTube of Asafa Powell leaving the block, and it's this big long jump out of the block, and his coach is like, longer steps are better and all this and that. But then you watch him in like the races where he's really fast. Like there was what comes to mind is a 60-meter dash that he ran, and it was kind of like one of those things where he probably wasn't overly, it wasn't a big meet, so he wasn't going to have the harder time that he might typically have. But his first step was really short there, and he torched that race. And the more elite athletes you watch, elite sprinters you watch, and this is let alone team sports where it's just like quickness. I mean, in a 100-meter dash or even a 40-yard dash, you need patience. If you're not patient, it's gonna really mess up your sprint. Team sports, athletes can spin their wheels a little quicker, relatively speaking, you could say. But anyways, it's just the full extension. It looks pretty, but at the end of the day, it messes up the timing. And I talk about this actually extensively in a new book of mine that's coming out. And actually, I wanted to give a plug for it because it's going to be on sale in a couple of weeks. It's called Speed Strength, and I think it's been a 3-year project. It's the most exhaustive resource that you could imagine on sprint biomechanics and special strength training and plyometrics related and sprint drills, quote unquote, and all these things, and planning and programming. So definitely, I hope you guys check that one out. But one of the things that when I was really putting together the sprint section, I was listing some research, and one of the important, and so here's something I do tend to get a little bit more intuitive driven sometimes when I'm talking about things. I do like to bring research in when I can, but one of the definitive factors in acceleration in 100 meters is how quickly athletes can recover the swing leg. Okay, which you may talk about that Peter Wayne study in 2000. But no, it's all vertical force. But when we're talking the 100-meter dash acceleration, the ability of an athlete to get that leg to the front fast, to reposition that swing leg quickly in order to be in a good position for the next step is critical. And of course we've heard these sprint biomechanists. I believe Ken Clark, when he was on the podcast, was talking about front side dominance early, because if you don't have it early, if it falls out early, you can't get it back later. And so repositioning speed is important. But well, guess what? When you really extend far and you really jump far, it takes a really long time for that long trail leg to get back. And I was actually watching a really cool start. It was Daphne Shippers and Elaine Thompson, and I forget if it was 100 or a 60, but it was a really perfect example to see two very powerful athletes. They have about the same reaction time. Shippers extends just a fraction of a second longer than Thomas, like keeping that longer post, whereas Thomas hits a slightly incomplete extension and instantly recovers the swing leg, and by step 2 she's already ahead. Basically step 2 or 3 she's ahead, and that was kind of the margin that she didn't really relinquish in the race. And so and that's just track. And so when we look at team sports, is even more so. It's like, why would we take a team sport athlete and have them do an exaggerated first step? And it's also the difference between sprinting is not jumping. And I myself am a great example. I'm a great jumper. I have a good standing long jump, a good vertical jump, but my 10-yard dash has just historically been horrendous, and it's all because of the timing. And this is something I have total credit for Darian Barr in teaching me. I was actually just doing 10s the other day, 10-yard dashes. And of course you could say, oh, well, and even, the podcast I did with Justin Moore, just because you run a good 10 doesn't mean you're going to run a good 40. I think a lot of that comes with the posture that you utilize. And there is a lot of efficiency that you could say, if you spin your wheels too fast and you burn it all up. But what I found was doing more traditional, I did every traditional cue in the book, trying to get a better 10. And then I just went to something that Adarian had taught me, which was I set up with my right leg in front, and my first step is my left. And instead of going long, I went short with my first step and long with my second. And I kept an actual asymmetrical pattern throughout the sprint. And I instantly dropped the 10th. Like, it was like that. And it was easy. And that just is a reflection of getting the timing right. And I felt like if I would have sustained that over a longer period, it would have been no problem either. Like, I don't think that it would have been, it didn't feel like spinning my wheels. There was a very smooth cadence to it. Obviously, this is just a personal anecdote, but I would strongly encourage everyone to explore that short first step asymmetrical pattern. There's a lot of power there. We look at even Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, has an asymmetrical run, and running is rhythmic, so it's going to extrapolate itself out. Anyways, it's just something that I do think is important to say, because we tend to be hung up in this, like more force. If a little bit of weightlifting is good, a lot is better. If improving your squat 20 pounds helped you put an inch or two on your jump, or maybe cut a tenth off your 30, then of course 40 more pounds is going to keep that trend going. And we make mistakes like this. And so I think it's like yin and yang. We have yang, which is like that masculine energy. Yin is the feminine. That's like this like force, and then there's the subtleties. And for some reason, I don't know, I think in the track industry or sports performance, there is always this trend of pushing things to that right as far as you can and never really exploring the other side. And so I think the answer is always somewhere in the middle. The world record is always somewhere in the middle. It's never always on the force end of things. So you have to explore timing, and you have to explore how each step impacts the next, and you have to look at the best in the world. And that's just a little, I don't know if I'd call it rant, because I don't feel like I rant. I don't get upset about things. I'm not the kind of person who sees something on social media and gets upset about it and has to tell my buddies, oh, look at this. But I just do think it's a trend that I think might be misleading people over time as to how the best athletes move, and even how to get a good start for the 40, because that early switch is the key. And if you go too long, you're not going to get a good switch. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. Okay. Anyways, okay. I had two questions that were pretty much the same. So it's cool to see people on the same wavelength. Maybe this is the time of year this happens. Two questions from Lumi and JJ Kleb about patellar tendonitis, how to prevent patellar tendinopathy, knee issues, etc., etc. So getting into this, because knees. Hurt knees is no good. It's no fun, and it really, especially if you're a jumping athlete or you like lifting, it really puts a damper on training. So just a few things. I'm not going to give you a whole book here, but here's just a few training methods and means that I think are cool, I enjoy doing, and I've gotten good success with both myself and my athletes. And that is this. First is extreme slows, stuff I pull from Jay Schroeder. So extreme isos and extreme slows. Extreme slow is simply doing a lift and performing it the eccentric phase very slowly, not really doing a concentric. I guess you could, but I just do it eccentric, taking between 30 seconds and a minute and a half to do the eccentric. And then isos, extreme isos, I've talked about that a lot, just holding an isometric position in the stretch range. Those are generally pretty good things for, and I remember the first time I actually heard Jim Snyder talking about this at Jay DeMayo's seminar, like 3-4 years ago. He called it like fascial remodeling, basically having athletes hold these positions isometrically for 2 minutes, and it had a great effect on the straightness, I guess you could say, of the fascia. Basically, it's like aligning everything and causing a better patterning. And I believe Jim is a massage therapist. I hope I don't get this wrong, but I think he said he could feel it because he works on his athletes, and he said he could also feel the difference, I believe. Hopefully my memory is good on that one. So those are two cool things. Collagen supplementation, I think that's pretty common if you have joint issues. One thing I've learned recently that I think I can peg a little bit to some of if my knees are flaring up, is over gripping the toes. So we tend to live in a world, I think, where there's a lot of like, grip the toes down when you squat, grip the toes down when you lift. Grip the toes. And if you don't believe me, it's probably been programmed into you, I'd imagine, if you've been in the weight room a long time, or just by virtue of being in the weight room. Just have an awareness next time you're doing cleans or squats, or a full catch clean is a good one, or anything. Just have an awareness of what your toes are doing. There's a good chance that as you're lifting, those suckers are going to be gripping the ground hard. And so what happens when you really grip the toes into the ground, and credit for I've had the great opportunity to learn from Adarian Barr and David Weck on this. But yeah, when you grip the ground with your toes, what you're doing is you're kind of locking yourself into one plane of movement, and it's a break. So you're basically throwing the brakes on and locking yourself into the sagittal plane. And when the body really twists, it utilizes at the level of the ankles and the feet. Pronation and supination use dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, inversion, and eversion. And so you're kind of locking yourself out of those ranges a little bit. When you do that, well, where does the force go? It goes up the shin into the knee, is kind of that next joint up. So if you've seen the joint by joint approach, you've probably heard that, where where the pain is, it ain't, right? Like it's starting somewhere else. And so overgripping the toes can be an issue there. You might also ask, well, what to do then if not to overgrip? Well, one, just have an awareness of what your toes are doing. If you feel them gripping, don't do it. It takes a long time to rewire. I like it, rewire. Which is the name of the conference that Adarian Barr is putting on, and I hosted not too long ago. So something Pat Davidson said, actually, if you were to squat and you were to say, what should my feet do? I asked Pat Davidson on our first podcast, I believe, but he had mentioned like having the tripod of the foot feeling the ground. So the heel, the ball of the fifth metatarsal, the ball of the first, and then with just a slight, just like ticking the gas pedal slightly pressure with the big toe. So basically the little toes aren't gripping. And yeah, I like that actually, because I feel like it helps you really kind of work in the triangle, and it's better than just going to that toe grip reflex. So that's also something that I would definitely work on. Another thing too, this is something I've learned from Adarian Barr, and this is a huge reason that I've gotten a fair amount of knee and mostly Achilles problems over the years, but knees as well, is watch the waveforms on the plyometrics that you do. So rather than, so let's say a hurdle hop, right? Like hurdle hop is vertical, 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 vertical. But the thing is, if you watch athletes playing sports, where in that sport, even track and field, even high jump, triple jump, long jump, you never see that waveform. You see long, high, long, high, long, high, and those types of things. And so when you expose yourself to this vertical only type of waveform, that really compresses, it causes the body to not be able to dissipate forces easily through the joints, and well, what takes it? Your Achilles and your knee. So doing like long high type plyos, if you're doing plyos, can be a good practice. It's just way easier on the joints, and it lets you be fast. And so that's one of my favorites. Okay, last one there is, I've heard, I've never done it myself, but I've heard awesome stuff about the ATG guys, the knees over toes guys, in the sense of people who had really serious knee issues and did some of that work and had a huge benefit from it. It really resolved their knee pain. So I think that stuff is good. I mean, your body can adapt to anything. We see the knees way over the toes and we're like, whoa, like, that's so bad. And I mean, if you start, it's like, I mean, yeah, if you have knee problems and you catch a full catch clean with your knees way forward with 300 pounds, it probably isn't going to feel good. But if you slowly build up over time, the body's going to, and this too with the isometrics, like if you can adapt in the long position, the long stretch position, that's the best position to lay down that collagen in, and it's just the best position to adapt to for healthy joints. So I think the stuff that those guys are doing is cool. If you check them out on Instagram, I'm sure you can get a lot of great ideas there.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster.
Okay, here we go. So they have another question that's probably, well, let's see. I had a few people with somewhat similar ideas and thoughts. And so, and actually I covered this on like 4 podcasts ago, 4 Q&As ago on Marv Marinovich's training. And I was actually went back and listened to my answers there. And it's like, holy cow, I gave an answer that I think was reflective of my early results. But now that I actually know people who actually use the system and have actually been coached in the system, I'm able to answer this more fully. But this is a really cool question. So Brandon McKnight, thank you for asking it, because I'm really excited to answer this. Honestly, this might be one of the biggest answers in terms of time that I take up today. Whether that's a good or bad thing, I don't know. But I'm really excited to talk about this and my experience here. But what are the key similarities and differences between the different neurological training styles? So Marinovich, InnoSport, DB Hammer, and also Jerome Simeon was listed there, who has utilized Jay Schroeder's work. And what do you find to be the most effective aspects of each? So I'll just kind of keep it to Marv Marinovich's work and Jay Schroeder's work. And so these are the two systems that have had the most profound impact on the way that I've trained athletes in the last 2 to 3 years. Marv Marinovich's work really kicking in this past year. And I think that they are systems that, they're on the fringe, right? And that's a good thing. I feel like they're spearheading the field, each in their own unique ways. And so, okay, commonalities. Dislike of traditional tempo weightlifting would probably be the biggest similarity, in the sense of trying to avoid co-contractions. And Matt Cooper talked about this a little bit on the last podcast we did together. So basically getting into positions where, let's just say a traditional squat up and down, the quads are on the whole time. They're on eccentrically on the way down. They're on concentrically on the way up. Then towards the top of the range of motion of the squat, as your body has to throw the brakes on to keep the bar from going off your back, you're going to program yourself not to extend fully and all these things. I'm not saying that I don't ever do squats. I utilize squats with my athletes, but I keep all this stuff in serious context with the distribution of how much modality I utilize throughout a training session. So both systems seem to dislike just doing traditional weightlifting with traditional tempos. And I'd say Jay's approach revolves a lot more around positions, and then utilizing those positions as a means to optimize neurological efficiency. It struck me or strikes me as a little more mathematical in nature. So a lot of 90-degree angle based work, or at least close to it, where one muscle can fire and the other muscle can elongate, and basically just putting the body in positions to be very efficient and a systematic way of doing so. And it's definitely claims to be not sport specific. It claims to be human specific to, because a muscle doesn't know that it's hitting a tennis ball or kicking a soccer ball or anything. It claims to just organize the human body so the human body can do its thing. Marv's training is a little bit more, I would say, specific, or it's a little more involved in the movement side of things. I would say the movements take a little bit longer to learn and be good at, being put through it myself now. And to me, learning it was very much, a lot of it was very much like fighting, like learning tension and relaxation. If you've seen any of Pavel's Satslin's fast and loose stuff, or if you've read Easy Strength and you've read the fast and loose ideals, that's a critical part of that system. And so basically it's running the body through a lot of physio ball based balance work, where again, it's all about the nervous system. It's not at all about pumping up or doing aesthetic stuff. It's entirely about how the nervous system is absorbing and then releasing force, and doing so as efficiently as humanly possible. And so both of the systems are very, very much slanted towards the most efficient system, the most efficient and powerful neurological system that you can create, with movement as a priority. They also, to my knowledge, both have breathing as a high priority list, where I know in Jay's work there's the nose breathing element of things, and then in Marv's work, in my experience with it, not tensing your jaw, making sure your breathing is fluid and you don't get stuck in a sympathetic state during reps, and trying to make it as sport-like as possible. And I almost view it too, I think a lot of it comes from, so I'll say this too. Marv's work also, it's a lot more than just the ball work, and I haven't even been exposed to the entire system yet. But from my experience with the plyometric end, there is a little bit more rhythm and coordination, it seems, and it's so is my experience so far. Just different box jump and hurdle jump combinations. You can get more exploratory with it, where Jay's work was more neurological, and there was obviously the ARP wave and a really deep understanding of the core neurological principles of the human body. So I hope I didn't butcher that. But also too, one of the big things too, and this is where I think someone has asked me some of the biggest changes I've had, and maybe this will be a question later on, but there are aspects I keep with me. So what are some aspects of the system that I do, that I've made my own? And the biggest one for sure is less traditional weightlifting. I'm not saying I don't do traditional weightlifting anymore, but I do every year. It's I do a little bit less of it, and doing more work at high velocity, doing more work where you're avoiding co-contractions, doing more work at fairly either full length ranges or specific ranges. One of the things I really like about Marv's training is working, and the idea that 90% of the effectiveness or the power in a movement comes from that quick muscular impulse at the peak torque point. So you could say in a vertical jump, at the bottom of the vertical jump, that spot where the muscle has to have fired to switch the downward to the upward, 90% of the jump is that muscle doing its job at that very instant in time. And that's also something I've learned from Adarian Barr, with just how fast you have to be when those joints load in that very short time. You have to be that fast to get everything moving and unload at that exact instant. If you miss the unload, then you're a step behind. And so learning to unload very quickly, but also fluidly has been a big thing. And so doing more, even more partial range work, like pulsing partial range work, pulsing partial range work on a ball. I'm like getting tongue twisters going here. Has definitely been something that I've definitely been all about. And I've really always been, I feel like I've always been about more high velocity work in general. I'm a jumper. I'm an elastic athlete. It's near and dear to me, right? And we, as coaches, we project what we're good at onto our athletes. And the neurotyping has helped me to spare like the 2Bs and the 3s from my reign of plyometrics. But I've definitely had an appreciation for really sport speed, for doing things at game speed as well as you possibly can. And even in Jay's system, like the jumps, it's all max intensity. Everything is as intense as possible to mimic what you're going to play like. And because if you're practicing at sub-maximal intensity, you're kind of teaching yourself to play at that intensity. And when you're doing body weight movements, you can harness that full, just violent intensity and effort that is demanded. Body weight or very light weights allows you to really harness that speed. And when you're using speed too, the body has to work like it's supposed to. When you're moving slow, you can get a ton of compensators in. But when you're moving really fast, the body's ability to compensate is much more limited. So yeah, those are some keys to the systems, and those two systems have had a huge and profound impact on me. And I'm excited to learn more and more about them as time goes on. And I hope that their impact is filters more and more into the coaching world. Okay, next question. So Sean Michael says, and I hope I get this right, I may have to paraphrase, but basically thoughts on how to change the environmental impact of the weight room. So talking about transfer with reactionary lifts. Okay, so one thing that I'm really getting into, this is just early strides, so this is conjecturing, take this for what it is, but the recent experience I've had with some of the Marinovich training is that, and working with Gary Marinovich in particular down in Santa Cruz recently, Gary, and I'm writing an article on this as well, but Gary made every set alive. And what I mean by that is, and this is something that actually originally kind of turned me off a little bit to strength and conditioning, sports performance in my early internships, where I was weighing things between coaching track and coaching strength and conditioning and sports performance, is in my early internships, you'd go in the weight room and you would encourage athletes and motivate them, which is cool. But usually it was just like, okay, here's your lift. You have 3 sets of 5 cleans, do these 2 things. Here you have 3 sets of 10, everything else. Okay, keep your chest out. And that was pretty much that. Like there was very few pieces. It was very, very simple. And the best training is simple at its core, no doubt. But it wasn't anything that really was challenging me, that was really like making me solve this elaborate puzzle. Or, I mean, because the human body in sport really is an elaborate puzzle. And or maybe I should say too, there was nothing that I felt like, wow, this is an art form. And this is something that I feel like I'm going to, I'll need 10 years of coaching to really master this and get this down. It wasn't there. And I felt like there was just at the time a lot more challenge that was existing for me in the world of track and field. And so I went that route. And I still stayed in sports performance, strength and conditioning, still enjoyed the heck out of it. And I mean, it's my full-time job now, and I love every minute of it. But one of the things that's really helped me to think of is you think of each set, and this being more recently too even, but each set being more alive. And what I mean by that is, and this is how Gary coached sets, is not having a pre-programmed number of reps, and not even, and this would be in the advanced version, but not even executing every rep the same way. So for example, maybe you'd be doing a leg press throw, and maybe for some of the reps you'd say quarter, he'd say quarter range. You have to do quarter range, then it's half range, then it's back to quarters, then it's full range, and you have to react to what he's doing. And you have to do it as hard and as fast, explosively as you possibly can, while keeping your breathing intact. And then when he decided the set would be done, then that was that. And then you'd go on to the next thing. And I feel like doing it like that, and granted too, I do believe in the importance of writing things down and having a plan. And like I believe Dan Paff said, have a plan, but don't be married to it. At least knowing where you're going. But I'll tell you, doing training like that was athletic and exciting and fun, and you could feel the intensity of it, the raw intensity of it. And when it comes to training, having this intensity that can replicate the game, well, shoot, there it is. I mean, in the past I've done stuff like you clap and you have to react to a clap or something like that for a start, and that's pretty simple, but I mean, good stuff. And I know other good coaches have done things like that. But the partners like calling the set, or a coach calling the set, it makes you really a part of what the athlete's doing. And it's obviously you can't do that in a large group. I mean, you could just have everybody do the exercise and start at once. And if you have a big voice, you can get them going. It'd be awesome. So yeah, that's been a big thing lately. Okay. DJ Meager says his question, and this being on LinkedIn, so thank you, DJ, is how important is hip flexor development in regards to athletic performance compared to glutes? So a simple question, but an important question, because the hip flexors, if you've seen like the research on sprinters at least, and if you work with track at all, hip flexors are where it's at. Like psoas is where it's at. Like if you want to be fast, you got to have that powerhouse there. It's like the psoas has been called like the glutes in the front of the body, I think. And I have a book called The Vital Psoas, and it's like the psoas are like the glutes of the front. You just can't see them, right? So it's like, it's not like you have these websites and movements dedicated to psoas training the way we are with glute training, just because everything we do in the weight room at least tends to come back to, do you look good on Instagram or the beach or whatever? So anyways, we know we need powerful glutes to be effective athletes. Like powerful, they can fire at the right time. They can fire in conjunction with other things. But the hip flexors, there's two reasons I see they're important. I mean, one would be the psoas, just being a powerhouse in and of itself. And so I'll talk about that first. And it's kind of like this. If you're sprinting correctly, that psoas is going to get developed on its own. If you're sprinting, and we say sprinting is the best strength builder. So yeah, sprint well, and that's going to happen. I'll go back to the overextension thing. And this is something I learned from Darian Barr, is that when you like overextend out of the start of a sprint, you stretch your psoas so long that it doesn't really have that it can't shorten very well. Like if you can kind of keep yourself in the bucket just a little bit more, that psoas, those cross bridges are a little bit more connected, and it's going to be a little bit more responsive. So also I'll talk about the iliacus. So we've heard of the iliopsoas complex. You have the psoas and the iliacus. Oh, I'm being repetitive here, but so the iliacus is the part of the muscle that kind of sits on that pelvic bowl. It tends to get more triggery. I think a lot of times when we think we're working on our psoas with a lacrosse ball or something or whatever, it's really the iliacus, because that's the one that's easy to feel and that type of thing. But the thing that the iliacus does that is important is it centers or joint centration of the hip socket. And so this was Kelly Baggett who originally wrote this some time ago. And he was talking about having glutes that weren't responsive, weren't firing well. And he did a large number of seated knee raises, basically where and many of you sports performance coaches know this, if your knee goes up to 90 degrees, thigh parallel 90 degrees, anything above that, from a leverage perspective, only the psoas and iliacus can pull from there. So all the adductors and all the other stuff drops out. If you're below 90, then you can get adductors and sartorius or whatever else is the synergist flexor. So he did a bunch of those seated knee raises above 90 and really targeted that iliacus, and he noticed within a couple of weeks that his glutes were way more responsive. And so I think with anything, like if you're going to build a muscle, if you want a muscle to get big, you want it to get big because the body's working correctly. And then you go out and sprint really hard and play your sport, and that muscle will develop on its own. I doubt Asafa Powell got his huge hip flexor muscles from sitting in the weight room, pounding out the cable knee drive. Like, I really doubt it. I know they do a lot. If you read some of the Jamaican stuff, they do a lot of those A runs, just like high knee runs. Even doing those in a semi-squatted position, you probably even feel your psoas hip flexors a little bit more. So dynamic stuff is really, if you want to get fast, that's where it's at, because it's just a balance of the muscle and the fascia and the connective tissue also. I'm not against knee drive work in the weight room. I think it's fine. But I like the idea of train the iliacus, selectively to get better centration if you have glute issues. And then just be aware of that good sprinting, good running is going to have a powerful effect on the psoas. It's an important muscle. I do think the glutes are like super overemphasized sometimes, just because you have really fast sprinters who actually don't have like huge glutes at times. I mean, glutes are important to run fast. They're a horizontal thrust muscle and those things, but you get all types, and big hip flexors are important, especially for track speed. So good question, DJ. Thank you.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by SimpliFaster.
So next we got a little trifecta here. And so I think what we'll do, well, I'll cover the first two. So basically first is how essential is lifting for sprint performance? And second one is best exercises and modalities that transfer from sprinting apart from sprinting itself. So that was from David Maris, and I can't pronounce the name of the second person. So anyways, sorry about that. Okay, so again, I will plug, shameless plug for my book coming out, Speed Strength, that has a lot of in-depth information on this that has taken me quite a while to really compile based off my life experience with speed, sprinting, and weightlifting. So I think I'll leave this short, but it's a little bit of a gray area. I think some athletes, like you look at Kim Collins, doesn't lift weights, it has longevity, right? And that's the thing too, is like, it's almost like again, weights are they're a little poison, they're a little medicine, right? Like, it's different. It hits every athlete a little bit differently, but it is introducing something unnatural into your system. So the longevity factor and the injury factor is going to be something there. But again, I mean, there is a ton of benefits as well. And I look at it like this, like the closer you are to just having the given gifts and somatotype of being an elite sprinter, and especially if you're an elastic driven sprinter, the less like real lifting you probably need to do, like heavy squatting, that type of thing. To the point where if you're built for it, I really don't think that you need to squat to sprint fast, and that might be heresy, but I just don't think you have to. On the flip side, there's a lot of athletes I think who can get great benefits from partial squats and hip thrusts and Nordic hamstrings and selective Olympic lifting and those types of things, as well as Alex Natera's ISO stuff, which I think that stuff is awesome. And we talk about doing no harm too. Like, I think if you're going to do no harm in that realm, if you just want to make sure you have that balance between frictional and elastic, you could call it, the muscular and the tendon, just doing some partial squats, super low reps, some of Alex Natera's work, some oscillatory isometric work. Some select hamstring work. I don't think you're going to go wrong. I don't think you need a deep squat. I really don't. I don't think it's terrible in the early stages of performance in those things. But there's athletes who can definitely get away without doing it. The more elastic and gifted you are, the less I think you need to do. If you're kind of on the other end of things, I think it's fine. I think it's good. But it all needs to be taken in context. Best exercises, modalities, I think I kind of covered them. But again, if you want to learn more, check my book out that is coming out soon. Okay. So next one, and this is kind of in the same realm of questions, which is from Lumi with 5 or 6 eyes at the end, which is heavy squatting necessary for high reactive strength? And so the answer to that is actually definitely not. It's heavy squatting is actually the opposite neurologically of being really reactive, especially deep squatting. Heavy deep squatting is teaching you to hold on to tension, teaching you to put more muscle into the movement, so to speak. Where reactive strength is all about releasing energy really quickly through the elastic system. So there's like a give and take and interchange. And so I would say it's actually the opposite there for high reactive strength. The one caveat there is, and I credit Max Schmarzo for this, is that look at the tendon and connective tissue adaptations of resistance training, heavy lifting, and tempo lifting. And I do think that component, so not neurologically speaking, is substantial. And maybe that's where we look at like the structural work and then the peaking later, where we kind of wash out the negative neurological effects of the lifting and we just get into this fast peaking work. And maybe the lifting helped us to optimize that, lay a little bit more dense connective tissue down in those early stages. So so neurologically, it's the opposite. Structurally, and tendon, from a tendon perspective, I think there can be some benefit. All right. All right, I think we got time for one or two more. So Sachin McDonald asked the question, the biggest change you've made to your resistance training programs. And it's just simply this: the last few years, taking on the ideals of Jay Schroeder and Marv Marinovich and infusing that into my systems. It's been a game changer, outside of neurotyping, obviously, but those two, it's been huge. Okay, Eros Milasine. Okay, Eros, thank you for the question. What did you think of NKT, the reflex stuff Dan Fichter was talking about, and similar neurology-based postural stuff? Okay, so basically asking about neuro stuff, anything that's neurology-based, even PRI claims to be it's neuro, it's neurologically based. And so I'll just really, instead of saying which system I think is awesome, here's a trick with neuro stuff. Is first do muscle testing, and whatever test you're going to do, flexibility testing, muscle testing, however you're judging the success of whatever your intervention was, do it enough to remove your own tester bias, for one thing. Because I've had tons of people do muscle tests on me and declare my psoas garbage and terrible and dysfunctional when really it wasn't. And going through NKT actually taught me how to muscle test really well. And that was the course was awesome for that stuff. And then understand the placebo effect. Understand the fact that if you do something and then you have an intervention, that you're going to get better. The key is just the stickiness of everything. How sticky is it? And that is what makes stuff valuable, because otherwise I think it's just easy to do a lot of messing around when you could be spending that time doing training work and like the Marinovich ball work and that's because that's reflexive. That's crazy reflexive through the reflexes of the spine, if we're talking neurology. So yeah, I would give that. And then my favorite, though, that I really use and fully integrate is PRI, just because it's simple and it's structurally sound, like based, like from landmarks, and you can see the left rib flare, and you can understand the pelvic tipping and one hamstring being one hamstring flexibility test. It would being less than the other, even though the hamstrings are the same length. But anyways, you hopefully you get what I'm saying. Okay. Last question we'll take here is this, and two people asked kind of the same thing, is basically best way to activate glutes when jumping vertically. Another person, that was CMOM Jump, and then Kayvon Persia asked how to work on the hips and control timing of the glutes for a 1 foot jumper, and how to implement that into vertical ignition. Thank you. All right. So basically, let's just go on this. So let's just go on the glutes and their role in jumping vertically, and then timing factors. So again, I was probably in this phase about 6 years ago, especially once I started catching on to hip thrusts, barbell hip thrusts as a means to help track sprinters. Is I was also thinking, I was like, oh, don't you need glutes and hamstrings like crazy in a single leg jump, like a high jump? Like that makes sense. Like, high jumpers should do a lot of that stuff too. And the more I've gone along, the more I realize like high jumping vertically is really the biggest two things by far are the feet and position. Having good feet that can intercept the ground properly and transfer energy to the maximal amount, and then getting the body in the right position at the right time to project one's self vertically. If you do this enough, your fascial system will adapt and get very strong. Okay, and that's huge. Achilles tendon, big time. Watch Hollis Conway high jump 710, and that's a man whose Achilles is straight up loaded. And so the foot and the fascial system, the Achilles, and position and timing, that's big time with getting up. You have to have glutes that fire at the right time. So, but the glutes and the feet have a link. So doing more barefoot work, I'm not against glute activation. I think you can do glute activation exercises if you need to feel that. I don't have a problem with that stuff. But basically just doing more stuff with minimalistic footwear, the more responsive your feet are and you're doing things right. Like Gary Ward says, the joints act and the muscles react. So if you're a single leg jumper, as long as I would say that you don't have like you're not always having like really tight hamstrings or low back, like where there might be a clear compensation, It was like, it's in the I think the book is the Vital Glutes. Like I have the Vital SOS. I think it's the Vital Glutes. I'm trying to remember, but there's the test where you put your thumb on the glute, your finger on the hamstring, and then your other hand on the QL on the other side. You do a hip extension, which goes first. Basically, if you have a lot of like hamstring and QL, low back issues, maybe your glutes are a little bit underactive, and doing some basic strength can help. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things that's like, I'm not going to take your glutes to the end point for the sake of this jump. And you also look at where the impulse is, right? So we're looking at like talking about the Marv Marinovich, 90% comes out of the impulse at that specific point of contact. Well, one thing I actually do like for this is physio ball. You could do a physio ball barefoot single leg wall squat at around about the point of hip flexion that you are going to be in when you have that point of contact, and just go through rapid pulsing and feel what your glutes are doing. The instability of the ball is going to make your body react a little bit faster. It's going to kind of keep things wired in a little bit better, and it's just a nice glute and posterior chain challenge to that area that fits in specifically to a single leg jump. So anyways, that does it for the podcast today. It's always awesome answering your questions. I apologize for those questions that I did not get to, but we appreciate you guys being here and being part of the show. Again, in closing, don't forget, visit our sponsor, SimpliFaster.com, suppliers of high-end training technology, as well as an awesome blog and customer service. They are doing an amazing thing in bringing you the best of each category of sport tech. And also, finally, if you enjoyed the show, leave us a rating or review on Stitcher, iTunes, whatever you're listening to the show on. I would totally appreciate that in just sharing the word of what we're doing and all these awesome coaches who have taken the time to help us all be a little bit better in serving our athletes. We'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.